As we returned home from Mass, we would often meet Monsieur Legrand, who was detained in Paris by his profession of engineer, and, except during the summer vacation, could come to his property in Combray only from Saturday evening until Monday morning. He was one of those men who, quite apart from a career in science in which they have in fact been brilliantly successful, possess an entirely different culture, one that is literary, artistic, which their professional specialization does not make use of, and which enriches their conversation. Better read than many men of letters, we did not know at the time that Monsieur Legrand had a certain reputation as a writer, and we were very surprised to see that a famous musician had composed a melody to some verses of his. Gifted with more facility than many painters, they imagine that the life they are leading is not the one that really suits them, and they bring to their actual occupations either an indifference mingled with whimsy or an application that is sustained and haughty, scornful, bitter, and conscientious. Tall, with a handsome figure, a fine, thoughtful face with a long blonde mustache and disenchanted blue eyes, exquisitely courteous, a conversationalist such as we had never heard before, he was, in the eyes of my family, who always cited him as an example, the epitome of the superior man, approaching life in the noblest and most delicate way. My grandmother reproached him only for speaking a little too well, a little too much like a book, for not having the same naturalness in his language as in his loosely knotted lavalière bow ties, in his short, straight, almost schoolboyish coat. She was surprised by the fiery tirades he often launched against the aristocracy, against fashionable life, against snobbery, which he called certainly the sin which St. Paul has in mind when he speaks of the sin for which there is no forgiveness. Worldly ambition was a sentiment that my grandmother was so incapable of feeling, or even almost of understanding, that it seemed to her quite pointless to bring so much ardor to stigmatizing it. What was more, she did not think it in very good taste that Monsieur Legrand, whose sister near Balbec was married to a titled gentleman of Lower Normandy, should indulge himself in such violent attacks against the nobility, going so far as to reproach the Revolution for not having had them all guillotined. "Greetings, my friends," he would say, coming up to us. "How fortunate you are to live here for such extended periods of time. Tomorrow I must return to Paris, to my little nook." "Oh," he would add, with his own particular smile, gently ironical, disappointed, and slightly distracted, "of course my house contains every useless thing in the world. It lacks only the one essential, a large piece of sky like this one. Always try to keep a piece of sky over your life, little boy," he would add, turning to me. "You have a lovely soul, of a rare quality, an artist's nature. Don't ever let it go without what it needs." When we returned home and my aunt sent to us to ask if Madame Goupil had been late coming to Mass, we could not give her any information. Instead, we increased her disturbance by telling her there was a painter at work in the church copying the window of Gilbert the Bad. Françoise, sent immediately to the grocery, came back empty-handed owing to the absence of Théodore, whose two professions, that of chorister with a part in the maintenance of the church and of grocer's boy, gave him connections in all worlds and therefore knowledge that was universal. "Ah," sighed my aunt, "I wish it were time for Eulalie. She's really the only one who will be able to tell me." Eulalie was an active old maid, lame and hard of hearing, who had retired after the death of Madame de la Bretonnerie, with whom she had been in service since her childhood, and had then taken a room next to the church, descending from it constantly either for the services or, when there was no service, to say a little prayer or give Théodore a hand. The rest of the time she visited invalids like my Aunt Léonie, to whom she would describe what had happened at Mass or at Vespers. She was not above adding some revenue to the small pension paid her by the family of her former employers by going from time to look after the curé's linen or that of some other prominent personality in Combray's clerical world. Above a cloak of black cloth, she wore a small white hood almost like a nun's, and a skin disease gave parts of her cheeks and her hooked nose the bright pink tones of an impatience. Her visits were the great diversion of my Aunt Léonie, who hardly received anyone else now apart from Monsieur le Curé. My aunt had gradually eliminated all the other visitors, because all of them made the mistake in her eyes of belonging to one of two categories of people whom she detested. One group, the worst, whom she got rid of first, were the ones who advised her not to listen to herself and subscribed, if only negatively, manifesting it only by certain disapproving silences or by certain dubious smiles, to the subversive doctrine that a little walk in the sun and a good rare beefsteak, even though 2 wretched sips of Vichy water would lie on her stomach for 14 hours, would do her more good than her bed and her medicines. The other category was made up of the people who seemed to believe she was more seriously ill than she herself thought, that she was as seriously ill as she said she was. And so, those she had allowed to come up after some hesitation and upon Françoise's kindly meant entreaties, and who, in the course of their visit, had shown how very unworthy they were of the favor being done to them by timidly risking a, "Don't you think that if you were to move about a little when the weather's fine?" Or who, on the contrary, when she said to them, "I'm very low, this is the end, my poor friends," answered her, "Ah, when our health fails us, still you may last a while longer yet as you are." These, the former as well as the latter, were certain never to be received again. And if Françoise was amused by my aunt's horrified look when from her bed she saw one of those people in the Rue du Saint-Esprit apparently coming toward her house, or when she heard the doorbell ring, she would laugh more heartily still, as though at a good trick, at my aunt's ever victorious ruses for managing to have them turned away, at their discomfited expression as they went off without having seen her, and at heart admired her mistress, whom she felt to be superior to all these people, since she did not want to receive them. In short, my aunt required that her visitors at the same time commend her on her regimen, commiserate with her for her sufferings, and encourage her as to her future. This was where Eulalie excelled. My aunt might say to her 20 times in a minute, "This is the end, my poor Eulalie." 20 times Eulalie would answer, "Knowing your illness as you know it, Madame Octave, you will live to be 100, as Madame Sazerin was saying to me just yesterday." One of Eulalie's firmest beliefs, which the impressive number of denials contributed by experience had not been enough to shake, was that Madame Sazerin's name was Madame Sazerin. "I am not asking to live to 100, answered my aunt, who preferred not to see her days assigned a precise term. And since, along with this, Eulalie knew better than anyone else how to distract my aunt without tiring her, her visits, which took place regularly every Sunday, barring an unforeseen obstacle, were for my aunt a pleasure, the prospect of which kept her on those days in a state that was at first pleasant, but quite soon painful, like an excessive hunger, if Eulalie was even a little late. Overly prolonged, this ecstasy of waiting for Eulalie became a torment. My aunt looked constantly at the time, yawned, felt faint. The sound of Eulalie's chime, if it came at the very end of the day, when she was no longer expecting it, would make her almost ill. Would almost make her ill. The fact was that on Sunday she thought only of this visit, and as soon as lunch was finished, Françoise would be in a hurry for us to leave the dining room so that she could go up and occupy my aunt. But, especially once the fine weather settled in at Combray, a good long time would go by after the haughty hour of noon, descending from the Saint-Hilaire steeple, which it had emblazoned with the 12 momentary rosettes of its sonorous crown, had echoed around our table close to the consecrated bread, which had also come in familiarly after church while we remained sitting in front of the 1001 Nights plates, oppressed by the heat and especially by the meal. For upon a permanent foundation of eggs, cutlets, potatoes, jams, biscuits, which she no longer even announced to us, Françoise would add, depending on the labors in the fields and orchards, the fruit of the tide, the luck of the marketplace, the kindness of neighbors, and her own genius, and with the result that our menu, like the quatrefoils carved on the portal of cathedrals in the 13th century, reflected somewhat the rhythm of the seasons and the incidents of daily life. A brill, because the monger had guaranteed her that it was fresh, a turkey hen, because she had seen a large one at the Rue Saint-Ville-le-Pin market, cardoons with marrow, because she had not made them for us that way before, a roast leg of mutton, because fresh air whets the appetite, and it would have plenty of time to descend in the next 7 hours, Spinach for a change, apricots because they were still uncommon, gooseberries because in 2 weeks there would not be any more, raspberries that Monsieur Swann had brought especially, cherries, the first that had come from the cherry tree in the garden after 2 years in which it had not given any, cream cheese, which I liked very much at one time, an almond cake because she had ordered it the day before, a brioche because it was our time to present it. When all of that was finished, there came a work of art composed expressly for us, but more particularly dedicated to my father, who was so fond of it, a chocolate custard, the product of Françoise's personal inspiration and attention, ephemeral and light as an occasional piece into which she had put all her talent. If anyone had refused to taste it, saying, "I'm finished, I'm not hungry anymore," that person would immediately have been relegated to the rank of those barbarians who, even in a gift an artist makes them of one of his works, scrutinize its weight and its material when the only things of value in it are its intention and its signature. To leave even a single drop of it on the plate would have been to display the same impoliteness as to stand up before the end of a piece under the very nose of the composer.